And I welcome you all to the second episode of In Conversation with. Last week we had Tex Grisham with us, and we had a beautiful screening of his latest feature film, Mustard, followed by a Q&A and an informal interview. Today's guest is we are having a very special person with us. We have Ian Simmons with us. Welcome, Ian. A little bit about Ian. He is a Rotten Tomatoes approved film critic and also a member of the Chicago Film Critics Association. He's also the member. He's also the mastermind behind Kicking the Seat YouTube channel, where he uploads movie reviews and analysis, and has interviewed many eminent filmmakers, including our very own SS Rajamouli for the film RRR. And as we dive into this fascinating world of film criticism, we'll be exploring the art of evaluating films, the role of a film critic in the industry, and what it takes to make it as a successful film critic in today's time and today's digital age. So all of you sit back, relax, and get ready for a thought-provoking conversation on the art of film criticism. So Ian, first of all, good morning again. It is pretty early. So firstly, thanks for taking out the time to join in. And how are you feeling and doing today?
Well, first, Shashwat, thank you very much for inviting me. This is a huge honor. I'm feeling great. I'm happy to be with all of you and excited to talk about film criticism and hopefully learn as much from you all as you will, hopefully, from me.
Yes, that is great to hear. Yeah, that's great to hear, Ian. So, did you just finish recording any podcast or anything, or today's Sunday morning is solely dedicated for this interview session?
Well, I've got a couple of shows that are coming out this week that I've already recorded, and that's great because, I do have a regular day job that's not related to film criticism, so trying to manage and squeeze everything into a week can be a bit much, so I'm a little bit ahead, even though I'm still behind in some areas. I actually may be recording a brief segment with my youngest son this afternoon, a review of the movie Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, which we watched yesterday. He's just started getting into movies, so we do these little 5-minute, what does a 5-year-old kid think of these giant movies? So it's a lot of fun.
In fact, now that you say that, I remember there is one video about Fantastic Mr. Fox where he also comes and reviews. So that was a very lovely video. So I enjoyed it. So I hope that it is similar to that. He's only coming, right? Yeah, he's going to be there.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then you said that you are managing with your day job and you're having a very packed schedule. So that brings me to my first question. That is, how did you become a film critic? What inspired you to pursue this profession?
I would say marital dysfunction. In 2009, I believe it was, I went with my wife's family to see the movie Julie and Julia, and I couldn't stand that movie. And we came out of the theater, and it was a long drive home because I was like ranting and raving and just complaining about how awful it was. And my wife, at some point, she said, "Look, you have to do something with this. You can't just keep going to these movies and then ranting at me about them. Turn this into something positive." So shortly thereafter, I did some research on how do you make a website? How do you review movies? And I came up with kickseat.com. I think I had a Blogspot website initially because it was free. And then eventually I was like, well, I'm going to do this for a while. So I paid for a Squarespace site, and I've been doing that ever since. And that was just, me writing reviews. And this is back right before I had kids. So I was able to turn out, numbers of reviews a week. I don't like to read those because I don't think that they're that great. But a few years later, and I'll give you the shorter version of this, I ended up going I asked the media, correspondent for the Music Box Theater, which is my hometown art house theater. I'd heard that they were doing some press screenings for critics to review movies before they come out. And I asked if I could get on that list. I had not established myself, but I'd been doing it for a couple of years. I'm like, why not? Why not ask? It can never hurt to ask. And I got on the list, and I was able to go see a preview screening of a documentary about The Shining, the Stanley Kubrick film about conspiracy theories, called Room 237. Yes. And at that screening, before it started, I got into a conversation with Dan Geyer, who was at the time the president of the Chicago Film Critics Association. Okay. And, he struck up a conversation because I think he didn't recognize me as, people who are regularly in the room. So it was a great talk. And he invited me to apply for the CFCA. And I had applied for another critics organization, I think the Online Film Critics Association or Society, and I had gotten rejected. And so I was still kind of stinging from that. So I thought, okay, I'm really going to apply to the same organization that Roger Ebert was a part of, and Richard Roper and Dan Geyer and all these people that I respect and read. But he said, give it a shot. So I did. And it's been about 10 years. I think this year is going to be my 10th year as a member of the CFCA. So it's been a wonderful journey. I've met a lot of talented people, and my film criticism, I think, has evolved because of meeting different people, different kinds of critics, and all of the benefits that come with being a member of the CFCA. So it's a great organization. There are other critics groups in Chicago and all throughout the country that I've also met and interacted with. So it's been great going from just writing stuff in a vacuum and posting online to now having more of a community that I can work with and spitball ideas and really understand what film criticism is and how it has evolved and how I have evolved writing it.
Wow, that was really that was a great journey, and we are so glad that this interview is also happening at the 10th year. So it's kind of a 10th year celebration. So congratulations, firstly, for completing 10 years as a film critic.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and so then you said that there have been, now that you have also evolved as a film critic yourself. So then how do you exactly approach film criticism, and what are the criteria you personally use to evaluate a film?
Well, we don't have all day, so I'll try and boil it down. there's a lot.
You can just go along. We have all the time in the world. You can just go along.
Well, it's film criticism means a lot to different people, and there are many different approaches. What I try and do is I read film criticism. I read critics that I like their style. I also read a lot of other different kinds of writing. I'm a voracious reader of fiction and nonfiction, graphic novels, comic books, just to constantly keep different methods of getting ideas across, constantly, in my consciousness. I try and write, conversationally, almost like this is different from how I wrote early on. I was trying to be a bit more, I guess, prestigious sounding and official, because I'm going to be a film critic. The best film critics, I think, are the ones who get across really, good, important, well thought out ideas, but in a way that's relatable to, someone who doesn't necessarily know anything about criticism or about movies. It's very conversational, very let me just tell you what I feel and think about this movie and see if you agree. Almost like a one-sided, dialogue or an inspiration to get people to think about movies and want to engage. Like I said, I have certainly had my more strident years where I was, I played around, not consciously, but I was a bit more harsh, I think. And in some cases, that still comes out a bit. But I feel like I've mellowed a lot in recent years, especially since I've evolved from writing to audio podcasting to now YouTube. And now I'm getting back into writing a bit more again. It's just kind of neat to see how things have changed.
Wow. So you as you said, so there were many criterias which you have to keep in mind. And what I can understand is that this criteria totally depends on one critic to another. So it's totally a personal thing, which depends from one critic to another critic. Which brings me to my next question, that is, how important is objectivity in film criticism? Is it possible to be completely objective in your reviews?
No, I mean, there might be people who argue with that, but to me, a completely objective film criticism would be, if you were talking about something written, it would be the movie began with credits, with a studio logo, then the credits happened, then this character walked into, a situation and X happened. That's just, a scene by scene breakdown. It's not really criticism. Yes. Criticism itself involves putting out opinions on how a particular work of art affected the viewer. And not just the viewer, but the critic who's writing about it. One of the things I think, and we might talk about this later, but there's a misconception, I think, that film critics somehow aren't also audience members and lovers of movies. Even when we get really vicious or go after a picture, it's not because we love doing it. I mean, I'm sure there are people who do, but it's also comes from a sense of, sort of profound disappointment. We want to love everything that we watch. We want to discover things. And when a film misses the mark, and sometimes it feels almost like deliberately bad, that's kind of a personal affront. So yeah, I don't think objectivity is possible. I think you should try and find the balance as a critic between, how you feel about something and what the actual material is, and perhaps what the filmmaker is trying to say, because you can bring too much of your own biases to a piece of film criticism. But the good news is the people who read it or watch your content will definitely let you know.
So going on that, you said that every film criticism, it's a big misconception that film critics do not like a movie. Like, people forget that you guys are also audiences, and at the same time, you as a film critic, over the years have also, you have built up an audience. There are people who regularly follow your reviews. There are people whose movies, who depend on your reviews rather to watch movies. So don't you think that many times, do you, like, you need to cater to a particular audience? So in that case, what happens is that you may have particular opinions about the films, and the audiences may have vastly different opinions from the about the movie. So how do you balance these opinions, this clash of opinions?
I don't. I mean, it's always good to recognize that you may be putting out an opinion that goes contrary to what the audience might think. I mean, the subtitle of my website is "Movie Reviews from the Last Guy Anyone Asks," and there are often times when I wonder, why the heck did I come up with that as a tagline, 12 years ago or whatever it was. I feel like I undermine my own credibility, but it really does stem from I've been told many times throughout my life, even before I began like actually reviewing movies, because I've loved movies since I was a little kid, but people will tell me like, and I kind of bristle at this sometimes, but I've learned to let it go a bit. They'll say, "Oh, you recommended a movie. I know to stay away from that one." Or, "If you hate a movie, I'm guaranteed to love it." I see that not just with myself, but with other film critics. But that's okay, because, as an audience member and as a film critic, I can only react to a movie honestly, the way that it genuinely affected me, right? So if I see a movie and I react one way, but I write to please an audience that, has contrary views to what I actually felt, then I'm being dishonest to myself. And it's also more that I would have to keep track of if I were to ever be encountered with that later in life. Like, what did you think of this movie? Oh, I hated it, but you said you loved it at the time. Like, oh, I lied. Sorry.
That's great to hear. Just 1 minute, Amit. We'll be taking up these audience questions. Sorry, Ankit. We'll be taking up these audience questions after this conversation is done. So stay with us for a little bit more, and you can ask these questions yourself. We'll be unmuting you guys one by one. Everybody is very excited to speak to you, Ian.
Well,
so,
again, I'm flattered to be here. So thank you again.
Yes. And thank you everybody for joining. Like those who have joined till now, and we are. So that was a very good. That was a great thing to hear, and like as you said that you really don't care about what think, because as a critic, your job is to put out the truth in front of the audience or the filmmakers many times. So then, do you see, like, then can you explain to us what exactly can be like, what exactly is the role of a film critic in the industry? Do you see yourself as an advocate for the audience or the filmmakers?
Well, I just want to step back a second. It's not that I don't care.
Okay.
It's sort of the exact opposite. Nobody likes to be the person on, in my case, like Rotten Tomatoes, if a movie comes out and it's got like a 98% and I don't like it and it knocks it down to like, 95% or something. I don't like being in that cluster of rotten film critics, that people, say they tanked the rating or something like that. It does hurt. Partially, and this is sort of leading into your other question, and it's a lesson that I've had to learn over the years. I can't advocate for myself, or I can't advocate for the audience or the filmmaker in my work. I can only speak for myself. But I have learned that there are people outside of myself who are appreciating a movie that, perhaps I just didn't get on their wavelength. There could be a very popular movie, like you popped in very briefly to my John Wick 4 live stream the other night.
Yes.
A movie that I didn't care for, and it was the #1 movie in the world last week, and it's got a very very high rating. A lot of people love it, and I didn't respond to it for very particular reasons. Now, earlier on in my career, I might have viciously attacked it and said, "Oh, this is terrible, and there's nothing of value in it." but I try and understand, as you may have seen with my co-host on one of my co-hosts on that show, Mark,
Yes.
who is a big fan of the movie and the entire franchise, talking through it and understanding why someone who loves a movie or hates a movie, why they feel that way, and how I might become better attuned to understanding that. So there are cases where my preconceived notions about something will come into conflict with other people, and it's hard because to your earlier question, I don't want to write something that's not honest, but I also want to be able to gauge whether or not my how much my opinion matters in the greater context. Does it do any good for me to come out and say there's no value in this is terrible, or I didn't respond to it, here's why other people seem to have found something of value in it?
Yes. Okay. So then, what are some of the misconceptions about film criticism, and how do you address them? So I know there are many, but you can tell us all you want, because there are many misconceptions. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are, like I kind of started off with saying that, film critics we kind of sit in these ivory towers and watch these movies and we just say, oh, we love this or we hate this. We're movie fans. It's some of the great conversations I have. And that's one of the reasons I love my YouTube channel and the podcast is I have other critics on and we'll hash out our feelings about a movie. Sometimes it's combative, sometimes it's a big love fest, but it's always educational. But I don't feel like, those are conversations I feel like I would have with regular, real people, because to me, critics are regular, real people. But there is a conception, especially when it comes to Rotten Tomatoes. It feels weird saying this, but I am a member of Rotten Tomatoes. I've been on there for about a couple of years now. But in the last 5 years or so, I think it really kicked off with probably Zack Snyder's, DC films. Right? People would say, oh, this movie is great, and the critics hate it. What do critics know? Are they shills for the big studios and that kind of stuff? That's the stuff that kind of irks me. Because in my experience, there may be people who are like the top tier of, film criticism who get like flown out to press junkets and screenings and stuff. Maybe that biases them, but I can't say that for sure. I just know that that's not me. And the people that I know who do review movies that I've talked to, they're sharing their honest opinions.
Yeah. So now that you have talked about these misconceptions which you have to kind of face, what are the important qualities that a film critic must have?
I would say the ability to communicate well, because it's a medium where you're trying to write to express yourself, or at audio podcasting, video podcasting. There's a certain bit of presentation. It doesn't mean you have to take classes on Well, okay, maybe you should take classes on how to write, communication and that kind of thing. You have to be honest, entertaining as you can be, but still being authentic. I think you need to, this is where it gets kind of sticky, because I think you should read a lot and also watch a lot of films. I have watched way more films in my 10 years as a certified film critic or whatever that I did, I feel like, beforehand. But it's also the kind of films that I've watched. I've gotten way into independent cinema, international cinema, micro budget filmmaking. My friend Sajiwa Ekanayaka introduced me to his films, and then we started doing a monthly series on micro budget indie filmmaking that we've done for like 3 or 4 years now. Having a large appetite for different kinds of cinema, I think, can only make you a stronger writer. You can love comic book movies, you can love romance or action or horror, but you really need to step outside of that, because it can only better inform your opinion about the genre that you're specializing in.
So, like you said that you have watched maybe more movies as a critic than before. So, like, doesn't it? Obviously, because now it's also like a part of your job. So, coming to that, don't you think that sometimes it puts an unnecessary pressure to watch a particular film on you? That, oh my God, I have to watch this movie because I have to review this, even though you don't like it personally. So, doesn't it happen? Is it not exhausting to keep on keep on watching movies, and for always? Yeah, obviously we all love movies, but at some point, didn't it come to your mind?
Oh, yes. Um, particularly during awards season when the movies tend to get really long. Like I was on my friend Mike Crowley's podcast a couple months ago because we were doing a year-end or an Oscars Best Picture commentary show. And I had, I think, 5 Best Picture nominees that I hadn't watched yet. And the shortest one was an hour and 45 minutes. And I had, I think, 2 or 3 days to catch up. So I'm just like, when I'm not working, being with my family, or kind of sleeping, I'm watching movies. So yeah, it gets to be its own kind of pressure. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any kind of movie, with the exception of like probably snuff films or something that's like illegal, that I wouldn't watch or give it a shot. There's always something to learn, even if you hate something. But there's also, you might watch something you don't think you're going to like that you end up, being fascinated by, and a lifelong love affair begins.
Yes. I can totally relate with that. And so, like you were talking about the award season, let's talk about the Oscars 2023 a little bit. What do you think about the Oscars this year? Are the awards justified? Like, did the deserving categories win, or was there any snub?
Well, the biggest snub, I think, and I've talked about this for months, is RRR, which and that's I discovered that movie in the fall of last year, and as I think I've talked to you about, and on the channel probably ad nauseum. So pardon anybody who's watched my content is going to hear the story again. But watching RRR, it's the best film I feel like I've seen at least half a decade, possibly 10 years, and it also opened my eyes up to the possibilities of Indian cinema. I feel like you talk about misconceptions, over in America, in the West, I feel like there's a concept of Indian movies that are sort of like, oh, well, everyone's like singing and dancing all the time, and they've got cheesy special effects, and they're all, there's other things to watch. Go watch a Marvel movie. In the last 6 months, I've been doing a monthly show called Spotlight India, where I watch a new, Indian film. A lot of it mostly comes from recommendations from viewers who watched that initial. I've got an entire spreadsheet of comments flooding in of like, oh, you should watch this. You should talk about this. If you think this was good, you should watch this. So it's really expanded my consciousness. I can't recall what the original question was. I'm sorry, I've gone off on a tangent
no,
because I'm thinking about RRR, and that's
it's really good. You can let's do this segment. Speak about Indian films. This is not a question. This is just your love and your how was it to explore. How did you feel like discovering Indian cinema? What were your conceptions pre-RRR and after watching RRR? Now that you are also doing a series. And we have something coming up next month. We won't speak about it now, but we have something coming up. So what it's now like, this is what's your perception of Indian cinema now?
I mean, it's great, and I'm in kind of a strange spot, and I've talked about this in a couple of the shows where I'm so enamored with what I'm learning about the culture and the just the production of these movies. I feel like I'm rounding a corner and discovering an entirely new universe that was right in my neighborhood the entire time. So I feel like because I'm so new to it, maybe my being enamored with it is clouding some of my judgment. Like maybe the folks who are, Indian audiences who are watching these movies are watching like, that's not that good. But me as, an outsider is like, this is amazing. It's the best thing I've ever seen. So it's hard to gauge that. I'm still trying to go in with an open mind and open heart. But it seems strange that I've watched, I think, 6 movies in this series, and I haven't had really much negative to say about any of them overall. I tend to love something about all of them, and they're all very different. So yeah, I look forward to being a few years down the road, having more of a knowledge and vocabulary of the cinema, maybe even going back to some of those other films. Maybe not RRR, because I feel like I'll love that movie until I die. But it's all good.
Yeah, and then just to add on that, India is one of those few countries in which we have regional cinema, and there are 29 states. So almost each and every state is having its own regional industry. So it's a very diverse country, and there is no one particular Indian language film. So there is Hindi films, there is Bengali films, there is Marathi films, there is Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, so Assamese films. So it's like it's as you said, it's a universe in itself. It's a universe, because there are so many different there are so many different kinds of movies made, and this is a matter of fact that Indian film industry is the biggest film industry in the world, because statistically we produce more than 10,000 films every year, which is greater than combined of all the industries, be it Hollywood or be it any other foreign film industries. Our reach may not be so much in the West, because of the language issues. But now, even earlier there was this thing of language barrier, but now subtitles have made it a lot easier, because in India what happens is, apart from Indian film, we also consume a lot of Japanese films, Korean films. So there are many. So there is a big audience for anime. There is a big audience for Korean K-drama. So all these things are watched in subtitles. So I hope that in future, Indian cinema is discovered by people in the West, and because there's a lot of movies made, and I'm sure that you guys will love it, and because the kind of filmmaking is different and everything.
Well, I remembered what your initial question was.
Yes.
Because we were talking about, the different impacts, the different kinds of movies, and how you hope that it's discovered by, probably American and other audiences. Talking about the Oscars you asked me about.
Yes.
My biggest snub is RRR. I mean, Natu Natu won Best Song, which is great. But, I look at all the other nominees, and I like a lot of the Best Picture nominees. I don't think Everything Everywhere All at Once, this is just my personal opinion. I know a lot of people love it. I'm in the minority here. I didn't like it, and I didn't think it, deserved Best Picture or whatever. There were a couple other nominees I think would have been better suited to that, but everyone's got their own taste. But I feel like the fact that an RRR not getting put up, for the Best Picture category, not getting recognized, I feel like if that movie had even just been nominated and had people had a chance to go see it in cinemas, because I know like AMC and some of the other theater chains, they do a thing where they're like, come watch all of the Oscar nominees on the big screen. I saw RRR at the Music Box Theater in, I think, October or November of last year. It was a one-day only screening where SS Rajamouli was there, and I actually got to meet him on the street. It was a huge privilege, but the audience, I think like half the people there had heard of RRR but had not seen it, and the others had watched it on Netflix. So to be in that theater, I mean, people were almost ripping up the seats. There was stomping and cheering and laughter and astonishment. I feel like people's lives were changed at that movie. And the fact that didn't even get that kind of exposure over here due to the Oscars, aside from the musical category, it's a big disappointment.
Okay, it's so good to see that you guys are appreciating our Indian films. So thank you, like on behalf of all the, even though we are not directly related with the film, but it's a great, it was also very proud moment for all of us over here at India too, because it's the first film to win in the Best Original Song category, an Indian film, an Indian song. So, and we talked a lot about RRR, and it was great. So then coming back to like you, as you said that you watch a lot of films. So do you kind of follow few journals, or do you, or like, again, since I don't know, and I'm sure many of the viewers also don't know about how film criticism or how film critics get to watch all the movies. So like, is it always before the release, or do you have kind of, like, as you said, or do you guys have like kind of a spreadsheet which you kind of refer to and watch all the movies? So like, how do you keep yourself updated?
It's tricky. My answer is different now than it would have been a few years ago. Before the pandemic hit, I had a totally different job in the same field, but I was working in downtown Chicago. And so there would be press screenings, much like I kind of mentioned earlier. But once you get into these, kind of prestige critics organizations, your name gets put onto the list of, film studio publicists. So if there's a big movie that's coming out, you'll get an invitation, an email saying, hey, come watch this movie at this theater, a few days early, and then you can write about it. Or sometimes there's an embargo, which means you can't write about it until a certain date. So it was really easy. I could just go after work. I could walk to the theater, watch the movie. Oftentimes I would record the audio podcast with a roundtable of critics in the theater lobby right afterwards. And then I could post it when the show went up. Now that I'm not working downtown anymore, it's hard to justify the expense and the time of going from my house in the suburbs downtown, and I'm away from my family more. So I've started, in a lot of cases, just paying my own money to go to the local AMC, which is a 10-minute drive from my house, on Thursday, Friday night, sometimes on the weekends, like I mentioned with Dungeons and Dragons, and then I'll put it up whenever I can. The disadvantage is I used to be able to get the interview or the review or the podcast up like the day the movie came out, and now it's usually within like a few days after it comes out, which is not the best, but I'm still making it work.
Yes. So, like, tell us a little bit about those press screenings, what it's like, because it's not it's not like watching it with a general audience who just go and buy a ticket to watch the film. But because, see, there are two sides of a coin to this. When you're watching the movie with a general audience, it's like everybody has paid their hard-earned money and they're going to watching that. But I have been to a few of these screenings with these special screenings, and I have seen that there is a very difference in the environment. The kind of people who are watching before the movie releases, and kind of people who are watching when the movie comes out. Because the pressure thing is, the filmmaker, most of the times they are there. So, like, is it not a pressure to, like, for example, you hate the movie, you don't like it, but the filmmaker is also there, and he or she is asking you how that movie is. So then what it's like, what's the environment over there like?
It's different because here, when we have press screenings, sometimes they're mixed, where they'll have a critics only screening, where it's just like it sounds, like it's not as many people in the theater. It's usually a smaller auditorium. And then sometimes oftentimes when you come out, there'll be someone like a rep from the studio or a publicist asking you what you thought, because then they have to send that information back to the studio to kind of get the consensus, like what the buzz is going to be. There are also mixed screenings, and those are the ones that tend to have the filmmakers or the celebrity kind of guest come out and say a few words, or maybe a Q&A afterwards. Those tend to be like contest winners. Listen to the radio, get tickets to this, advanced screening of whatever. And then they'll also have a section roped off for press, for film critics. So I don't really feel pressure in either situation, because if there's a Q&A afterwards for a movie that I didn't like, and I've certainly been in those situations, I just don't raise my hand. I don't ask anything. I just sit there and let other people, enjoy it or whatever. So there's not really any pressure. There have been times when I've been tempted to get up and leave, but that would be rude. So
I get that. So you have been film critic for you have seen and you have evolved. You've seen change. You've seen the change in the space. So then, what is the difference now in film criticism than it was when you joined in 2009? What it's now in 2023 versus the time in 2009 when you joined? How has it changed in this digital age?
It's tough. I feel like a lot of the big changes happened before I got online, because some of those changes were already underway. I mean, it's a cliche to say that a lot of the newspaper critics and the more established outlet critics, going back to like the Siskel and Ebert days, you'd have like a couple of big city newspapers that would run film criticism. And that was like the voice of, the institution, kind of telling people this is what's good, this is what's bad. The democratization of film criticism, not even just film critics proper being online, but also Twitter, YouTube, other social media, where literally anybody can walk out of an auditorium, turn on their phone and say, here's what I think of this movie. It's kind of diluted the conversation, not necessarily in a bad way. It's just different now. There are people, and I think possibly this has led to some of the more sensational takes, some of the most out there opinions, which you kind of got to watch out for. Again, I don't have a problem with being outrageous or having a controversial take, as long as it's how I really feel about it. It takes a lot for me to get really worked up about something. I'm not going to come out and say nobody should ever watch this movie. That's not going to happen. But it's hard to be kind of moderate in your
Yes.
opinions, even when you don't like something. Because like, chill out, it's just a movie.
And now it's kind of, I don't know if this is the last question or not, but for example, somebody's trying to be a film critic. What is your advice to them? How they should plan their career roadmap for being a film critic?
This is a tough one because, as you know, I am a professional film critic, but I don't make money off of it. I have a day job that, kind of allows me the freedom to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and do all this stuff before I start my regular, 9 to 5 job.
Yes.
And it's, as we were just kind of discussing, it's harder and harder to find paid film critic jobs at institutions that will allow you to live off of that money.
Okay.
But I would say, if you want to be a film critic, just start doing it. If you can. I don't know. I hope this doesn't sound ignorant of me. I don't know what the situation is like in India. If you've, we have Blogspot over here. Maybe that's an international thing. If you've got your own version of it, it's a free blog hosting site.
Blogspot is there. Many people have it. Blog post website.
Okay. Again, I'm still learning about that stuff, so I hope that doesn't sound terribly awful. But so yeah, you can get a free blogger site and just start reviewing movies, post them up every week or however often you want to. Google Images is great because you can go and get movie stills to kind of amplify your content if you want to do that, and then just start getting into a cadence of doing it regularly. Build up sort of a portfolio of film criticism, and then you can expand to try and find an audience. Get on social media, say, hey, come check out my review of X, or maybe start a podcast, or maybe if you know people who have podcasts that you like that are about movies, see if you can maybe guest on them or offer your opinion and just build an audience that way. If you have a local or regional, film critics association or society like we have in Chicago, we've got a couple of them. Reach out, go to their website, see what it takes to join, to become an established. It might take a while because as I mentioned, I suffered some rejection, and I had been doing it for a few years before I even got the invitation to come to the CFCA. And part of that is because when they went to look at what I'm doing, they understood that I've got a body of work. I'm not just, trying to get in so I can get into free movies. I really care about this stuff. So you might not get a high-paying job as a film critic where that's the only thing you get to do. But if you work hard enough at it and you care, there are plenty of avenues. It's like being a filmmaker in a lot of cases. You can pull out your iPhone and shoot a movie. You can do the same thing and be a video film critic, if you want to do that.
So then, with the advent of internet, we can say that the distribution channels for film criticism there's a lot of variety of options. So like people can do podcasts, videos, writings, and even maybe I think in Spotify and everything also people can get their podcasts apart from not only YouTube, right? So like Ian, this may be a little bit. I should have asked this a little bit earlier, but then what exactly do you do while reviewing a film? Let's say let's say our film is coming out, film X is coming out, and you have been invited to the special screening of it, and you have been asked to you will be publishing a review after this is done. So like let's pretend that we are Marvel for now, and we have a $200 million movie budget coming in, and we have invited you and many other guests and for the special screening, and we want you to review the film. And so then just walk us through the process. And there is an embargo. Our film is coming out on the 2nd of June, let's say. So there is an embargo till the 1st of June. And then what will you do? So what will be your process like?
Are you talking about like a written review or a podcast or what?
Yeah, like your YouTube channel, like whatever what you do for a new movie which is about to come out. But the only difference is that now you are invited. Like as you said that when you were in downtown Chicago, you used to get invited to these special screenings. So then just walk us through this process of what exactly happens, right from the mail you get to, this can be a long answer. So not an issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to it. I mean, that's one of the things, talk about a misconception for the people who are independent, film critics who don't have like an apparatus to build the thumbnail or post the content or do the social media. That's one of the things I learned is that I got to do all that stuff by myself. And so I would say let's just say we've got this movie that I've been invited to go see. If I know what date the movie is coming out on, and there's enough notice, what I'll probably do is I'll go to. I've got this group of friends and colleagues that I call Earth's Mightiest Critics. We started talking about comic book movies, but now that's evolved to basically it's my go-to folks for talking about, you know, any kind of big release. So I'll query the group on Facebook. We have a messenger kind of group, and I'll say, hey, who wants to, you know, who's going to this screening? Do you want to do an episode about it? You know, since we're not usually doing it in the lobby afterwards because it's all video now, I'll say, okay, if the screening's on Tuesday, can we get together on Zoom, like, you know, Thursday?
Yes.
Then I'll go to the screening. Sometimes I'll take notes because I'm getting older and I watch way too many movies, so it's easy to forget stuff. And I don't sleep a lot, as we've established. Then I'll come home. I'll get ready. I'll send out the Zoom invitation to the group. And then, yeah, it's showtime. You know, Thursday night, if we have an established time, we'll, you know, do the round table. I'll record it. After it's over, I'll take that raw recording. I'll download it to, Premiere, Adobe Premiere, which is a film, you know, an editing program. I'll kind of put in maybe an intro title card, like, hey, this movie's opening this weekend or whatever. And then do some light editing. I don't tend to edit a lot in my videos unless there's, you know, a technical problem or something. Then I'll publish it. I'll post it to YouTube. And I'll wait till the embargo date's over. But once it's ready to go live, I'll hit publish. I also do an audio podcast version that's on Kickseat.com. Okay. So I'll download that recording. I'll put it into a free program called Audacity. Yeah. I've got some intro and outro music, so I'll just kind of cut that together. I'll copy the YouTube link into the post on Squarespace because that directly links it. So the main image you get is the thumbnail from YouTube, and you can click right on it and go to the site. But also have some paragraph description below it, similar to what's on YouTube, and I'll have the audio podcast there, which also feeds directly into iTunes. So it's just a matter of maintaining kind of two presences on the movie to get the maximum exposure. And then after it comes out, I will write an email to the publicist who invited me to the screening and say, hey, here are links to all of my coverage for the movie, and they'll take that and, you know, they'll send it to the studio. One interesting thing that I think is good for filmmakers to know, because I was very timid about this for years when I first got into the CFCA, is wanting to please everybody and thinking if there was
I was just about to ask that. I was just about to ask you that since they are only inviting you, don't you feel if you have a you know, different opinion about the movie than which is not in the favor of the filmmakers, then how do you respond?
You respond honestly, but kindly to the film publicist. You know, you don't want to go and say, I hated this. You know, you can say I hated this movie, but don't be mean about it. You know, say, hey, so and so, thank you for the invitation to watch the movie. Here's what I thought. You know, look, I'll share my review when it goes, you know, live next week or whatever. But especially if you're coming out of a theater and the publicist or whoever is asking you for your opinion, don't yell at them. Don't chew their head off because they are just. But this is the lesson that I learned: is they love it when you love a movie, but if you don't love a movie, they didn't make it. They're just representing whomever, like the agency that's promoting, you know, helping the studio promote the film. So they're just going to send your answer in a spreadsheet back to the studio. They're not going to take it personally if you hate the last 6 movies they invited you to. I mentioned earlier, like film critic access and getting flown out to press junkets. One of the misconceptions I've heard that may be true, but I'm not in those upper echelons to really know for sure, is that if you rate a Marvel movie poorly or you talk about it badly in your review, then you're not going to get invited back to the next thing. I haven't seen that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I've reviewed several movies poorly and I always get the invitations to come back.
Oh, wow. So you have been invited to these Marvel premiere films, right? So
not Marvel the premieres like in LA with the red carpets and stuff, but the advanced screenings, right?
Yeah. Wow. You know, so for all the Marvel fans who are watching this, you know, if you have any spoilers, you know, this is generally a totally from a fanboy point of view question for Marvel. That is, you know, you guys get to know all these spoilers before the movie comes out. So isn't it hard to keep it to yourselves, because the Marvel takes pretty strict actions when if if you know, if you leak spoilers or anything like that happens, especially in Twitter, because Twitter becomes a
Oh, yeah.
mad place before a Marvel movie comes out, and there have been scoops, this, that, and I remember the time distinctively before No Way Home was about to come out. My God, I used to spend my entire day on Twitter because, and yeah, that resulted in because by the time I went to watch the movie, I knew each and every scene because I was all day on Twitter and I knew the entire movie.
Oh no. Well, yeah, I mean, I'll go back and correct the record. Like, breaking embargo is sort of the cardinal sin of film criticism, because the studio is trusting the publicist to enforce on the critics who are agreeing. You know, usually in that email there'll be a paragraph saying reviews are embargoed until X date and X time. Sometimes it'll be like, sometimes it'll be like noon Pacific, you know, whatever. So you better not put up your review at 11:30 Pacific, because they will, they'll come after you. They'll say, you know, this is uncool. You know, what are you doing? I don't know too many people who have violated embargo in that sense, so I can't tell you any horror stories. But it's just something that's understood to be unprofessional, and you know, just abide by the embargo, or abide by the embargo, and just do your thing. There have been times where, and because I don't go to the advanced screenings as much anymore, I don't feel as bound by it, but I still try and respect it, because there will be situations like with Marvel films, and I know with the Star Wars sequel trilogy from a few years ago, there'd be a thing like, in your coverage, please do not talk about spoilers or give away X plot points or whatever. What's really crazy is sometimes in the solicitation email, they will say, please don't reveal this fact, for a film critic that hasn't even seen the movie. Is like, they're spoiling me in the email. I'm like, well, that sucks. But the whole thing is, you know, they'll say, don't reveal this stuff. So what I would do, because when I have podcasts, I like them to be very open, honest, a lot of times spoilery, I'll go out of my way to say, you know, in the description, I'll say there are spoilers, or after this minute marker, there are spoilers. In the audio introduction of the video, I say there are spoilers coming up, or I'll tag it. So if the person, it's my way of saying, we're going to spoil the movie, but the only way you can spoil it as an audience member is to ignore everything and listen anyway.
You know, this was a great conversation, Ian. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. And now we'll be opening up the audience questions. So, and firstly, thank you. It was a very insightful conversation from, and I hope that all of you, like those who are watching it live right now, those who have joined in, you all have enjoyed. And right now I'm opening up the audience questions. So already one question came from Ankit. And rest of you guys, those who want to ask you, Ankit, are you here, by the way, in the meeting? I think Ankit has left. Okay, so I'm just going to read out the question, what he said. So what kind of exposure you got early that you think made you a film critic?
I would say, I don't know exactly how to answer that, because as I mentioned, when I started doing it, it was, my wife pretty much told me, you've got to do something with this. I'm like, well, this is the most constructive thing and it's kind of fun. But no, I grew up watching Siskel and Ebert, you know, and there were, like, I think it was Bill Harris in Hollywood back in the day. Like, I loved movies since I was a kid, and my parents would show me, you know, movie clips shows because they were fans of movies. So I got to see that, yeah, there are people who get to talk about movies and why they're important and help foster my love for film. So I feel like it's fun carrying on that tradition, hopefully helping out other people. Not only if we disagree on something, hopefully I'll get my point across so that they'll at least understand why we don't agree, and maybe that'll help them in their watching of future movies to look for things they might not have thought of, and vice versa. I learn a lot of stuff from comments that I get from people as well, like, oh, maybe I need to rethink the way that I'm approaching this movie.
Shubham, you can go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Ian. Hi. Shashwat. It's been great to be in this live chat. My question for you, Ian, is that what's the best scientific or like technological movie that you have seen and you liked really, and it's like you can also rate it on terms of uh, how technical it was for you and what made it like Interstellar. Like, did you get all those things at the first go, uh,
So
or
like, yeah.
you can also tell any of your movie that you like technical wise, and you that made you understand, that changed your view about the world, I guess,
So
like
like basically he's asking about Christopher Nolan films, like those mind-boggling films which
or
made
maybe
you,
like
yeah, yeah.
web series like Silicon Valley or something, which makes you like has some technological parts, but also has some human parts as well.
Yeah, it's a great question and a really tough one because there are so many great, sci-fi movies and TV series out there. Interstellar is a good one. It's tough because it's rare that I'll see a movie that has the visual technological spectacle that also matches it up with a great story. And so, like recent examples, I'm trying to find, like, everyone loves Avatar and Avatar: The Way of Water. I don't love those films. I think they're amazing technologically, and I love James Cameron as a filmmaker. In fact, I look at Terminator and Terminator 2. I think those are fantastic sci-fi future dystopia movies that use a lot of practical effects. Stan Winston was a genius when it came to that. So you don't have to get overly, CG, go bonkers with it. And I think we've certainly seen that that's the case
Yeah.
in some of the Terminator sequels that have come out in
Yes.
recent years that are awful. But I mean, if you're talking about pure spectacle, I'm going to say a movie that is probably going to make a lot of you groan because it's the most obvious answer, but 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick.
Oh,
Because
nice.
it's it was made in the late 60s. And so it's a lot of model work and stuff like that. But if you've ever seen that on a big screen and just been completely immersed in it, I mean, the Stargate scene alone at the end, I still don't quite understand how they pulled that off. And I think it says a lot about humanity and the way that we approach ourselves and the possibility of life on other worlds and how that life can be so incomprehensible to our little human brains. I think it's just a beautiful movie.
Oh, nice. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you, Shubham, for your question. It was a great question.
Hello. Good morning.
Hi.
So I have two questions for you, if you don't mind.
No.
So the first question is, in this day, nowadays when Twitter is so important, and in this day and age where cancel culture is becoming so rampant, how do you feel about potentially problematic media, and to what extent should you be open-minded about them, and where should you draw the line, and how do you feel about imposing your own morals on films?
That's a great question, and it's a very complicated one. That I will say, Shashwat, that is one you asked me earlier. How have things changed since I became a film critic up until today? Yeah, there are things that I wrote 10 years ago that I would not dream of writing now.
Yeah.
But it's weird because depending on there's the social political landscape, especially in America and UK and other places, it's become very atomized, very complicated, a lot of different factions, a lot of sensitivities, perhaps overly so. Again, I can just do my best to stay true to it, try not to alienate anybody in my commentary or my criticism, although sometimes that's just going to happen. It's the best example I can give is, there's a film critic named Armand White, who is, he writes for the National Review, which is a conservative outlet. And he was a very controversial film critic. He was one of those people that, appeared to hate everything and had all these kind of outrageous takes on movies. And I, was one of those people that when I would read, the clips or the pieces of his reviews that people would put out, I'm like, that's ridiculous. And this guy's a clown. But he's, very funny and outrageous in the things that he said and very provocative. I was like, he's just trying to get attention. I had a chance to interview him a few years ago because he appeared in a compilation of film criticism with some other, highly respected film critics. And they had all worked together at an independent newspaper in New York, back in the 1980s, I believe, and they were all friends. I was like, wait a second. So these other established critics were friends with Armand White and colleagues, and I actually read White's criticism from back in the day. And I was like, this guy is a very serious thinker about film. He's very passionate. He's very knowledgeable. His colleagues, adore him, even if they don't agree on things. And so when I interviewed him as part of a roundtable for that book, I found that he was, just the nicest, most generous guy with his time. He wasn't anything like the bombastic monster that I thought he would be. And we have developed, somewhat of a friendship. We've reviewed a number of movies over the years, and a number of them controversial. I think I'd made some kind of a flippant remark about the racist movies of D.W. Griffith, like Birth of a Nation. And I believe my recollection of it is he called me out on it and says, have you ever watched Birth of a Nation? And I said, no, because it's, a very famous film from the early part of the last century about, the rise of the KKK. And so he said, we should watch it and talk about it. And so we did. And it's a spectacular piece of filmmaking. Yes, some of the material is problematic, even by the standards of the day, and definitely by the standards of today. But then we watched Orphans of the Storm, and oh my gosh, there's another film of his that I was talking about yesterday. I forgot the name of it right now. But anyway, the film that I can't remember the name of right now, I'm embarrassed, but was actually, by some accounts, his apology or his reckoning with the racism of Birth of a Nation. But that's a conversation you can't really have today. I was talking with someone about Song of the South, a movie that Disney has locked up in the vault for very many obvious reasons. But it's not only can you not watch certain films, you can barely discuss them in polite society without being shouted down, unless you're saying no one should watch these movies or how dare they. So some of the complex conversations are more difficult to have. I like to think that I try and have some of those on Kicking the Seat, but without imposing my own morality, not shrinking away from things that I believe to be true, but not trying to bring down the hammer and say like, well, you're just, a woke idiot or something like that. Because my own politics are very complex. I grew up, very liberal and in an open-minded liberal household. And I feel like I've become more conservative in some ways as I've gotten older. But I think part of that is because the conversation on what I consider to be the progressive liberal side has gone so far out of whack that I don't necessarily think I'm a conservative. I'm just a liberal from about 20 years ago, if that makes any sense.
That was a great answer. And Sambudha, thank you for your question. Next question.
I actually have, okay.
Yeah. You can. You have another question?
Sorry. Before you ask the other question, the name of the movie I was trying to think of is Intolerance by D.W. Griffith. Yeah, I recommend that as well.
I'd have to check it out. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your insight. That was great. And a far more personal question. It's like, so obviously you've improved over the years, presumably at writing reviews, and for us, maybe we don't have the time to write our own blog. So what I do is I write reviews on my Letterboxd account. How do I know? Because I don't have an audience. How do I know that I'm getting better at writing reviews? So what should I do? What are the habits I should have?
That is a great question. Because you don't really know if you're getting better in a vacuum. I mean, you can go back and look at your old Letterboxd reviews or whatever you've written, after a certain amount of time and say, oh, I could have written this better, or I could have been more concise or whatever, or maybe that opinion was crazy, it's changed. My advice, if you want that feedback, is, you can just reach out to your friends. I don't really use Letterboxd, so I'm not exactly sure how it all works, but you can invite people to say, hey, check out these reviews if you have some time to, have a few minutes. Let me know what you think. Or you could start a blog, like I said, a blogger site or something else, and just post your reviews there and then share that out on social media and say, hey, this is my website. I write capsule reviews, which is a thing. Reviews don't have to be 1,000 words long. They can be 500. I wrote capsule reviews for, I think, about a year, which is between like 150 and 300 words, which is its own discipline. Trying to distill what you think about a 2-hour movie into something that is, will take 2 minutes to read is a very difficult feat. So there are avenues to get your work out there. If you're just talking about improving yourself and not necessarily building an audience, maybe you can do both at the same time. But just ask friends, colleagues, or the general public for feedback, and they'll give it to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was great. That was great. How you actually kind of gave a pathway to the independent, just like independent filmmakers, independent film critics, those who want to just get started. Our next question is from Angana Mondol. Anganadi, do you want to speak, or shall I read the questions? Can you turn on your mic? Okay, then I'm reading. She also has two questions. She's, by the way, she is also a part of our documentary film team. So she has done a lot of interviews. As I was talking to you the other day about the documentary, so she is part of the crew member. So her first question is that now that you're watching Indian movies, have you watched any independent Indian film, which is not from the major studios?
That's hard to say because I don't really know what. I mean, this is gonna sound bad. All the films that I've watched, they seem like they are, bigger budget productions or at least medium budget. So I can't really speak to whether or not I've watched an independent film. I mean, even in America, independent film takes on a really strange definition. Like Everything Everywhere All at Once, I've heard referred to as an independent film, even though it's got Michelle Yeoh and Jamie Lee Curtis in it. There are independent films that are also micro budget, like my friend Sajiwa makes. So there's a giant range. So I don't exactly know how to answer that question. I would say if I had to guess, they are the bigger, on the larger scale of things. But I'm definitely open to watching smaller productions. I love independent film, regardless.
And then next question is, nowadays a lot of people are obsessed with Asian dramas, series or movies. And as a critic, what's your take on it? What can be the potential reason behind it?
I can't really speak to that. I know, I can't really say, what the obsession is or what the interest is because I haven't really, kept up on that. But yeah, I'm not gonna pretend to know.
I hope, Angana, that answers your questions. And our next question is from Deepak Kumar. His question is, what could be the parameter of the quality judgment of a movie?
Parameters of like how do you judge whether a movie is good or not?
Yes. It's like, what are your personal kind of criterias which you have to kind of rate a movie or judge a movie?
I tend to focus a lot, and this is just me personally, but story is big for me. It's one of the reasons that I like a lot of early Marvel movies, just to go back to that paradigm, and I don't like a lot of later stuff. I'm coming up on the end of a year-long boycott of comic book movies and TV shows because when I watched Doctor Strange: The Multiverse of Madness last year, I'm like, I'm done. This stuff has not been good for a couple of years, and I'm going to take a break. I've broken that rule a couple of times because as my 5-year-old I mentioned, he's into these movies, so he wants to see some of them. But you can have the biggest special effects budget. I go back to Avatar: The Way of Water. James Cameron spent 13 years perfecting the visuals of that and about a half hour on the screenplay, I'm convinced. So yeah, that's big for my criteria. The other is, does the movie set out to accomplish what it wants to accomplish? I'll go back to John Wick 4 as another example. For those who haven't seen it, I'll try not to spoil too much, but in the beginning of the film, John Wick, apparently it starts off like the thesis of this movie is John Wick is going after the High Table, the shadow organization that has been ruining his life for the last 3 movies. And then they're not really mentioned again or seen at all, except in the form of this giant henchman that they've sent out to get him, which I feel like has been the plot also of the previous films. It's like we're gonna finally take down the High Table, and at the end of the movie, you're like, I haven't even seen anyone from the High Table in this 3 hours.
That's for the next part. That's the business mind.
Yes. Yeah, there you go.
That's the franchising model of the movies. Well, I think that also ends up the audience question round, and I don't think anybody else has. So let's take a picture. Everybody now, I think everybody can turn on their cameras for a picture. I think we can just pose. But like those who can turn on your cameras, please let's just take a picture with